Welcome to Weather Classroom. I'm Thomas Patrick, meteorologist with KREM 2 News in Spokane, Washington. We're back with another edition here on YouTube, and after a couple weeks off, but with good reason. The record-breaking heat in the Pacific Northwest, along with the wildfires that we've seen recently, has kept myself pretty busy, and our entire newsroom for that matter. In fact, big kudos to everybody working at KREM 2 News. They have been just working their butts off, to put it no other way. Shout outs to all of them. They are keeping everybody informed and safe between both the heat wave that we experienced at the end of June and all the wildfires that have cropped up over this past month, because usually our wildfire season is more in the core of it in August, so an early onset to that, and they are working so hard to keep everybody safe in this time. But with that, moving on to today's topic, it actually is on that historic heat wave that the Pacific Northwest experienced at the end of June. So that's the content that we're going to be going into today. It actually is kind of a spur off of a previous weather classroom, which I had about heat domes. That was actually at the beginning of June. You can find that episode in the playlist link here. But this was the exact setup that we had: huge ridge in the jet stream and an intense area of high pressure classic textbook heat dome, except this was centered over the Pacific Northwest as opposed to the southwestern US or over the southern plains like Texas and Oklahoma. So a bit of an odd location for the heat dome, but in terms of its meteorological impact, it was as textbook as it gets. In fact, the high pressure area was as strong as we've ever seen in this region, and the temperatures likewise were also some of the most extreme, if not record-breaking, for this region. And it was all coupled by not just that factor, we can add the drought into that situation as well. In fact, it was at the time an extreme drought for eastern Washington. It's actually elevated to an exceptional drought, and it's actually this positive feedback loop where the drought promoted hotter temperatures, and the hotter temperatures as a result promoted a more severe drought. So that's that positive feedback loop that's just feeding into itself. And again, we're still in mid-July. This is only going to get worse throughout the course of the summer, which is our dry season in the western US. So all these factors came together to give us these historic levels of heat, particularly for the Pacific Northwest. The 5 cities that you see here, including in my current location in Spokane, Washington, these are all-time record highs that were broken or tied. In fact, Salt Lake City and Las Vegas are the ties. Spokane, Seattle, and Portland, those are all record breakers. In fact, 116 in Portland, Oregon is significant. In fact, it was 3 straight days. It was June 26th, 27th, and 28th of 2021 where Portland broke the all-time record high, and then the next day broke it again, and then finally the next day hit 116 and broke it again. It was 3 straight days of all-time record heat. So these were values that we had never seen before, and what makes this even more impressive is that this happened in June, not July or August, because July and August tends to be the hottest months of the year on average, or what is typical for this region. Sometimes it's more June for the Midwest and the Central Plains of the US, but July and August is our hot season, and to get these kind of temperatures in June was nothing short of incredible and record-breaking. If this heat wave would have happened at the end of July, it could have been even hotter yet. So we could put that into context. Here in my viewing area, which is Central Washington, Eastern Washington, and parts of North Idaho, I was even looking at all of our individual cities, no matter how major or small that they might be. And these were the old all-time record highs, and some of them were pretty hot as well. And now here are the new all-time record highs. About like 7 out of these 10 cities that I have listed here all broke all-time record highs, and there was a lot across Washington and Oregon and parts of Idaho as well that hit these all-time record barriers, including 109 in Spokane, Washington, 108 as you just saw in Seattle, Washington. But here's the thing, until this year, I had only experienced a high of 105 degrees in my entire lifetime. And that was actually in Milwaukee, Wisconsin when I was growing up in 1995. And This is my first experience with a extreme dry heat as well. So I actually sat down with my coworker, fellow meteorologist, our morning met, Jeremy LaGoo, and we discussed what it was like to both cover and experience this heat wave this year. All right, today I'm actually really excited about my interview here because we got our own Jeremy LaGoo. He's actually in the Outdoor Weather Center right now. By the way, love that place. How's the morning show been treating you?
Oh, so well. It's nice and mild every morning, and it's like the only time to beat the heat. So it's nice to like get up, do something while it's still cool, and then it's hunkering down in the afternoon. So
Yeah.
not bad.
Yeah, don't be afraid to take a couple extra vacation days so I can see the morning crew more often, right?
Oh, all right, yeah.
Yeah,
I'll do
okay.
one later
Oh, yeah.
next week. Next week. There you go.
Well, it's a good thing that you mentioned the heat because I mean, it's just been so wild recently as we're talking about the historic part of the heat wave. I mean, it would almost be a crime to refer to it as the previous heat wave because it feels like we're still in the heat wave. So let's call it the historic part of the heat wave. We had 109 degrees on June 29th, just the all-time record high in Spokane, and several
Yeah.
other Pacific Northwest cities were hitting these all-time record high marks. What was that like? Have you ever experienced anything like that before to see those temperatures get so close or even in the 110-degree marks?
Yeah, I have a couple of times. I've only actually lived through a full day of temperatures like that once in my life. I actually went back and looked at Minneapolis because that's where I grew up as a kid. And I thought, I know we got hot as a kid, but I don't know how hot. We had a stretch where we were 106 to 108 for about 3 days. And that's the warmest I've ever had to live through. Other than that, I've been through Arizona when it's been in the hundred and teens, but it doesn't feel like that same kind of heat when you're down there. And I've been, down in parts of Death Valley once. I drove through to go, oh, I did it. That was really great. But I did not sleep there that night, did not hang out there. So for me to like live through this as an adult, I'm no, I could never. It was absolutely bonkers. I don't know. How'd you do in it?
Yeah, I was gonna say I kind of did the same thing. I remember leading up to that event, I was just like, yeah, I remember a hot day in like 95 growing up in Milwaukee, and it was only 105, but that was just like a 1 day thing. And it feels weird to admit I've never vacationed in Phoenix or in Vegas, and I've never drone through Death Valley. Those are kind of on my bucket list things still. So that was my first dry heat experience itself, and while it was hot, at least it wasn't humid hot because yes,
Yeah.
there are plenty of days in the summertime growing up in the Midwest where it's humid hot, and I could almost say it was worse in the humid
Yeah.
kind of heat, but it was still just so hot that I still got that same experience at night where it didn't cool off enough to be able to open the windows, which I think is one of the best parts about living in Spokane and in the inland Northwest, is that we can still get cool nights in the summertime. We don't have to run the air conditioning 24/7, but it was right back into that. So there was a bit of familiarity to it because the AC was running all the time, even at night, but it was still just so extremely hot that it was just, I don't know how to describe it. It was because I wasn't sweating. That was the big difference. It
Yeah.
was hot, but it felt like I wasn't sweating, and that was kind of the big difference for me. And were there any things that were surprising about the heat here in Spokane that maybe caught you off guard, or like yeah, I've lived in Phoenix before, but was there anything that was different about Spokane that made that
Uh,
heat different?
Yeah, well, back when I was doing all those things, I actually lived out of a car. And I was doing the whole van life thing, driving around the country. So I was actually living here, and to just see like even running the AC for a few more hours, getting the notification from a Vista saying, "Hey, your electric bill looks like it's spiking right now. Is everything okay?" And I'm going, "Yeah, it totally is." Or even the fact that we had those rolling blackouts where parts of town had their transformers overheating, and then to try to explain that to viewers saying, hey, this is much different than California or Texas where they're
Hmm.
overdoing the whole grid. And this is just things are overheating because we don't ever get this kind of heat. And one of the other things that you did mention is that we didn't really cool off at night. We are basically in high desert ish kind of terrain here, kind of climate. So when we're typically as dry as we are in the summer, you get those 30-degree temperature swings. So going from 95 during the day down to 60 at night is cold. It feels cold, but it never felt cold. And that thing was shocking for me because I would go, okay, we're at 109 during the day. 75 at night's going to feel nice and cool, or 75 when I'm standing here in the morning is going to feel cool. But then I would come outside and we are in the 70s and I just feel like I'm sweating and it's gross and I'm not
Hmm.
getting any break from it. And, here, much unlike Arizona or Death Valley or those locations or the Midwest, even, nobody has AC. Like, you're kind of a blessed one if you do. So you're scrounging for a window unit, you're hanging out in just that room of your house. And that part of it was kind of weird. Even, Portland, Seattle doing the same thing where everybody's going, what do I do? How do I cool off?
Yeah. Now, you're in the Outdoor Weather Center, which is a place that I'm quite familiar with as well. And when we talk about not only the temperatures during the day, but at night, I think this is where we can put our two experiences together, especially on that day and that next morning, because a lot of focus was on it hitting 109 all time record high, a temperature that was never ever achieved before during the day. And I remember working that night, and I was standing right where you were with our anchor Mark Hanrahan. It was 11 o'clock at night, and it was still 93 degrees. Dark outside. You could see the stars, and it was 93 at 11. I know we don't have records for specific hours, but I think that may have been a record if we did. And then you were there the next morning, where our low temperature of 78 was also
Yeah,
the
that's wild.
all-time warmest low temperature ever. And it's just like those things feel like it gets overlooked. But we were there. We were outside and being like, it's not all that cold out here, and the sun's not even up.
Yeah, that's what the weird part was watching the sun come up and going, all right, I'm in officially the coolest hour of the entire day, and I don't have any break from this sort of heat. So that to me was one of those biggies where it was just, okay, when are we going to catch a break? And you mentioned it a little bit earlier, the historic part of the heat wave versus right now. We're still in the 90s every day. We've been in the
Hmm.
upper 90s in Spokane every single day. And then if you take into account that downtown it's a little bit warmer than out at the airport where they keep track of the temperatures for the official records, it's been even warmer. We've been up close to 100 degrees for weeks now,
Yeah.
and it's just unrelenting. I don't know about you, but I lied to myself yesterday and thought, I'm kind of used to this. I'm going to go do a bit of yard work and I'm going to be outside. And within 2 hours, I was going, this is a terrible idea.
Yeah.
What am I doing? Why am I
Yeah.
here?
Yeah, you mentioned. I mean, Spokane has such a big elevation difference. It's the lower you are, which is usually downtown, is one of the lowest spots in town. The hotter it gets, just because of the that's how the atmospheric dynamics works on those days. The lower in elevation you go, that air still compresses, still warms by a couple more degrees. So you're absolutely right. Even though those records say 109, we're in the 90s every single day. You could almost assume and reasonably assume that downtown is even warmer than that. There was one thing I wanted to mention to you, and I don't know if you caught this. One of my reports, I was out in Post Falls, and I was out by like one of the riverbank beaches there. And I
Okay.
remember it was the day before the record breaker, so it was still 105 outside, and
Yeah.
just leaning back on that bench, and I remember being so hot. But the thing that was surprising to me about this heat wave is that it felt like I wasn't sweating, which is something I wasn't used to for hot days. It's like my forehead was dry, my hair was dry, and I'm like, am I sweating? And I was, but the sweat was drying so quickly, it basically felt like I wasn't sweating. And that was an experience that I had never felt before. And I was able to confirm that because as I walked into the lake, up to my knees, came back out of the water, within 60 seconds, my feet and legs were dry because the water was evaporating so quickly. And I think that was the big takeaway experience for me, that was so surprising about the, I guess you could quote it, the dry heat, as opposed to the just soaking wet Midwest heat.
Yeah, I actually saved up. I saw the heat wave coming. We talked about it for almost 2 weeks before it got here. And I actually went out, I bought myself a paddleboard. I was like, I'm going to treat myself and I'm going to get on the water every day during this heat wave. And I actually made a purpose point to take every afternoon. I left right after the noon show, drove down, got in every different body of water around us. I can give you an honest rating of all of them. And I got in the water every day and I would dive off the paddleboard. I'd swim for about 10 minutes, kind of pushing it along, then stand back up. And I was cool for all of 30 seconds. And I would go, oh, this feels really nice. Winds blowing light. It was relative humidity is around 25% for a good chunk of that. So within a matter of 30 seconds to a minute, I was entirely dry. There was one time where I just stayed out of the water just to see how long it would take the shorts to dry out. And it was within 3 minutes, they were
Wow.
entirely dry. And I have a dog and she goes everywhere with me. So I was pushing her in the water and then pulling her back on the paddle board. And she would stand there and she normally shakes off like all dogs do. She would just stand there and drip. And within just a few minutes, she would be looking at me to go back in. And after, I don't know, maybe 2 days, she just reached the point where she knew when she was supposed to jump in the water. And she would just dive off the front or the side of the paddleboard just for a little relief because it was just so hard to cool down with that lack
Mhm.
of humidity. And then your sweat doesn't do anything. They say it does something for you, but I think when it evaporates that fast, it's almost the equivalent of having a higher humidity where your sweat's just staying on you. Maybe.
Yeah. And that's the last point I wanted to bring up because that's between the two of us. We've lived in many different parts of the country and seen all
Oh,
these different weather
heated news.
climates. Yeah, I know exactly. It's great. So let's settle the age old question: dry heats, humid heats. What's better? What's more tolerable? Because
Ah,
when it's dry heat, it's like 109, 110, 120, 130 if you're going to Death Valley. But then the humid heat is okay, it's 95, but sopping wet. What's better?
yeah.
Is there pros and cons?
See, that's one where you get into like for I don't think it's fair to compare a humid 100 to a dry 100 because you just don't necessarily get that when you're talking about the difference between dry heat and not so dry heat. Your sun can heat us up faster if it doesn't have to fight all the moisture in the atmosphere. So you can't really compare that. So I like the idea of like 95 to 105. I think that's a more fair comparison. And maybe it's just the Midwest kid in me. I know you're from Milwaukee, I'm from Minnesota. And when we would get up to like 95, you find a way to either go to a body of water or have that fan blowing on you consistently. And a fan, when you're sweating like that, actually does feel better. But no fan is going to help. It's just blowing hot air on me, and I'm not sweating because it's evaporating so fast. So I felt it much harder to find any reprieve from the heat. And then when you're up at that 105, you have that higher summer sun angle. Even if you're in the car cranking the AC, it's just not keeping up. And you're like,
Hmm.
come on, I can feel the cold air blowing out of the vents, and there's a lot of it coming. But I drive a black car, you drive a black car. There are times when you're just not winning that battle, even with everything cranked to the max.
Yeah, and I was actually going to go in the opposite direction, except for that last
Sure.
point. I can definitely confirm that my car's AC just could not keep up with
Yeah.
how hot it was. I mean, let's say it cooled the temperature by 20 degrees, and that was basically it. So if it was 100 outside, it was blowing 80-degree air on me. And if it was 110 outside, it was blowing 90-degree air on me. And yeah, it just could not keep up. But I actually will go the other way. I felt that the humid heat of the Midwest summers was just awful because it's the moment you step outside,
Okay.
it's just like a wave of just like, oh, I'm sweating, I can't dry. I just would remember just being like trying to dry off my hair just by putting my hands through my hair, and then my hands would just be like wet. It's like, well, now I'm like sticky and I can't touch
Yeah.
things. Your
Okay.
shirt starts getting through, and once you're sweating like through your shirt, you're done. And those are when I've been to like Summerfest and Warp Tour concerts that are
Yeah.
outside venues, and you're just there all day, and as soon as your shirt sweats, you're kind of done. So I felt it was a little bit easier to at least stay dry and be able to, like, okay, if I need to splash water on me, at least that will evaporate. But I get the point of, yeah, the fans don't work when it's 105 because you're physically just blowing air that's warmer than your core body temperature on you. So I get
Yeah.
that, but it was just the wetness of the humidity I feel was worse than it being 105 to 110 dry heat in Spokane. And it's not the driest of heat ever. I mean, our dew points were still in the 40s, so it still wasn't even a fair equivalent to like a Phoenix or a New Mexico dew points at zero kind of heat, dry heat. So there's a little bit
Yeah.
of apples and oranges, wouldn't you say? Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I like it. And yeah, I guess I did momentarily forget about that moment where you open the door and that like wave of hot wet air hits you and you're just like, "Oh, is a dog breathing on me? What's going on here?"
Yeah.
And so that is miserable. You are right there. I just keep thinking, back when I was a kid, as soon as I started sweating, I was like, "All right, whatever. I'm never going to dry off. That's just the way it is." Then
Yeah.
you go into AC and it feels miserable when you go back inside because you're soaking wet. Didn't really have that here. So yeah, you got a good point.
Yeah. I
I
think
might change my mind.
we let's get two people in a room, somebody who's experienced the dew point in the 80s and somebody who's experienced the temperature in 120s, and we'll let them fight out. Let them fight it out which is worse. Well, Jeremy, first of all, I just want to say thank you for taking some time out of your day just to sit down. I'm very jealous of where you are. I know you got the Tom's Barbecue logo in the
Yeah.
background, so I'm excited to literally be sitting exactly where you are sitting in about like 5 hours time, getting ready to chow down on some Tom's Barbecue lunch. But yeah, thanks again for hanging out, and we'll be sure to chat again soon.
All right, no problem. See you, Thomas.
We can probably debate dry heat over humid heat for several days to come here. Other records that appear to have been broken during the Pacific Northwest heat wave, including these that actually need to be investigated because they are so significant. 117 in Salem, Oregon. Looks like it was the hottest temperature ever recorded west of the Cascades in the Pacific Northwest. So that would be in Oregon or Washington. And meanwhile, in Washington, several sites are going to be investigated for statewide records. That record was 118 degrees last set in 1961 near the Tri-Cities area, and it was that same area where I definitely saw that Richlands Airport got up to 118, but that along with several other sites need to be investigated to make sure that the equipment was working properly and gave the temperature readings accurately as well. But 118 during this heat wave would tie the statewide record. Anything above that would actually break it. Such is the significance of that Pacific Northwest heat wave that we experience. And again, if you want to learn more about the heat dome and the science and the meteorology that goes into that, I actually have a weather classroom on that topic that you can find at this playlist as well. But yeah, don't want to drag on a little bit longer here, so just have to say that it's going to be a pretty long summer for us. This heat wave occurred in June, and July and August are still two of the hottest months out of the year that we still have ahead of us. And while I didn't get into it today, climate change is definitely a contributing factor to this heat wave as well, and that is kind of one of those underlying foundations that very well could set the stage for more events like this in the future. It's so hard to make sure that everybody grasps that climate change might not have a one-to-one correlation with it being 109 degrees in Spokane, Washington on any one day, but because of that underlying factor that is climate change, we can contribute that to the location of these heat domes, the intensity of it, the drought that we're currently experiencing. It just has an influence over all those factors that make heat waves like this and the historic part of these heat waves not just possible, but more common. And that's something that we will be discussing here on Weather Classroom in future topics to come. So make sure to stay tuned for that. Thanks for tuning in today. Make sure to subscribe right here to the KREM 2 News YouTube page, as well as my YouTube page. That's meteorologist Thomas Patrick. You can find me at any social media platform at Thomas Patrick WX. You can give me a follow there, and you will find all the information you need, not just on this topic, but all the future topics that we have planned for you here on Weather Classroom. Anyways, that'll do it for today. Hopefully we'll see you next time, and stay safe out there. Take care and have a great weekend.